Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to talk about the RMS Lusitania. Not necessarily about the ship itself, but the fact of what happened to it. To this very day, we really don't know everything about the Lusitania, and in many cases, no one wants to talk about what really happened with the Lusitania, especially when you deal with what was going on with the American and British governments. Because what happened with the Lusitania was nothing but an out and out crime in many different directions. I have often been of the belief that World War I, which was the stupidest thing that ever happened to mankind, because it was a war that did not need to be fought, it did not solve anything. The only thing it guaranteed was more wars. The Lusitania is a victim in the middle of all of that. The Lusitania was part of the Cunard Line, a British-based company that was seeing hard times in the early part of the 20th century, and so a deal was made with the Admiralty that the Lusitania and the Mauretania would both be designed to not only be beautiful and fast ocean liners, but that they could be converted in quick time to military light cruisers. That's not talked about very often. They were subdivided with massive watertight compartments, rendering them very difficult to sink. In fact, the Lusitania and the Mauretania were advertised in 1907, 1908, all the way up through 1912 to be practically unsinkable. But of course, the Lusitania does sink. It sinks rapidly with a great loss of life. Why was the Lusitania sunk? Why was the Lusitania where it was in the first place? Why was it without any kind of protection? Why was there no cruisers or destroyers to protect it? Was it deliberately left out to be damaged? To be destroyed, perhaps? One does not really know, but nonetheless, that the sinking of the Lusitania was a terrible moment in the history of man, of warfare, and of crime on the high seas. Now, when I say crime on the high seas, it's not just one-sided, because the crimes were on both sides. The Americans were very guilty, the British were remarkably guilty, and the Germans were moderately guilty. You see, not just the Lusitania, but many vessels, many ocean liners had been loaded up with armaments to be sent to England, sent to the Allies, from a neutral country called the United States. Now, the Lusitania was not the first time this was done. This had been done countless times. And as far as I'm concerned, if someone is going to attack me, let's say they're going to throw a rock at me, if I can find a way to stop that rock from getting to the person who's going to throw it at me, I'm going to damn well do it. Therefore, I don't have a major issue with what the Germans did. It's sad lives were lost, but it was not the fault of Germany. It was the fault of England and the United States for allowing passengers to be put on a ship that was carrying armaments. Clear in there. They were using that as a smokescreen. And not only that, the Germans sank the Lusitania, and then England went out of its way to say how innocent and how as pure as the driven snow it was, and they started a propaganda program of epic proportion. The first thing that came out is a medal. In fact, let's see. Here is that medal. Now, I'm sure maybe some of you have read about this medal. It was supposedly made by the Germans to celebrate the sinking of the Lusitania. Now, of course, there is a grain of truth in that. This medal, the original design, was made in Germany basically to mark the sinking of a ship carrying armaments that was going to kill Germans. Secondly, the medal mocked the British, who were allowing citizens to go onto a vessel loaded with ammunition. They were talking about how dishonest the English were, and they were dishonest. The United States was dishonest. And they had every right, the Germans, to sink the Lusitania. I know that sounds harsh, but can you imagine today? Can you imagine today that we decide to send, let's just say, to a country that we don't like, a bunch of armaments? Basically, it's known. And then what we do, we put all kinds of citizens, come spend your Sunday afternoon on our ship filled with war materials. And what would happen if that country saw that ship coming and they sank it? Well, we could use it as propaganda against them. But in reality, that country had every right to do it, because that was going to be used to destroy them. So this medal that I showed you, this was made in England. They made copies of the German medal, changed it around a little bit, so it made it look like they were celebrating the sinking of the Lusitania. And you know something? They might have gotten away with it. It's all in German, except on the very bottom, which you probably can't see here. They have the date, May 1915. Everything's in German, but they goofed. May in German is M-A-I. In England, they spell it M-A-Y, and that's how it's spelled here. Another thing that they did, more propaganda. This is a picture of the Lusitania, and here is the message that they put on it. It's amazing what bogus nonsense. Another thing, a song came out. When the Lusitania went down, all about how cruel the Germans were for sinking an innocent, unarmed, purely peaceful ship. There's no truth in that statement whatsoever. But however, if we look at the history of World War I, we see that the Germans, the dastardly Huns, sank the Lusitania, and all of the innocents lost their lives. They shouldn't have been there in the first place, because the only ones that were innocent were the people on the ship. It certainly wasn't the English, it certainly wasn't the Americans who were innocent. Those two groups were the nastiest part of this whole thing. In many ways, I've often thought that it would have been nicer for Europe to not have the United States involved and let Germany win the war, which would have been nicer.